So hello everybody, welcome to this information session and webinar which is called Crystalline Silica, Your Questions Answered. My name is Katie Geszner. I'm an Education and Engagement Advisor and I'll be hosting today's webinar and facilitating it. Just before we get started, I'd like to take the time to respectfully acknowledge the Geszner people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening to this session. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of South Australia. So today's webinar is going to be a little bit different to what we've done in the past. So in August, we held the webinar Crystalline Silica Substances in Mining and Construction, where we dissected the new regulations for crystalline silica and discussed the effect that these have on mining and construction industry. So some of you may have attended that one. And both during that webinar and after the webinar as well, we got a lot of questions come through. And so while we answered as many as we could on the day and via email, we wanted to facilitate another session where you can ask questions of the panel and they will answer them to the best of their ability live. We've also compiled some of the most frequently asked questions, which our panel have researched and will be providing answers to as well. So let's meet the panel. So first of all, we have Stuart Robb, who's the manager of the construction team at SafeWork SA. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for being here.
Morning all.
We also have Michael Paterson, who's the team leader of the mining team. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And finally, we also have Ryan Jurkowski, who's the occupational hygienist from SafeWork SA's work environment team. So thank you, Ryan, for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Just a couple housekeeping things. This webinar will be recorded. And it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next few days or so. So if you do want to watch it back, there will be that recording. However, we will not be providing the slides. We will not be providing them, but there will be a recording available. Throughout this webinar, if you do have questions that you'd like to have the panel answer, if you could just pop them in the Q&A tab up the top of your screen there, fill them in, and then once we've gone through our frequently asked questions, we'll look in there and answer as many questions as we can. I'll just note one other thing. Since our last webinar, SafeWork Australia has actually released the Model Code of Practice for managing risks of respirable crystalline silica in the workplace, which is a comprehensive document providing additional advice on the silica regulations. So we are recommending that you refer to this code of practice if you are looking for some more information. This is kind of the most comprehensive document we've got at the moment. So if you are looking for some more specific advice, or anything like that, do refer to this code of practice. The information presented in today's webinar is primarily from that code of practice. So we've got a QR code there on the screen for you to access that. And I'm also going to pop a link in the chat in a second as well. All right, without further ado, let's begin with our frequently asked questions. So, Ryan, I'm going to start with you. How does a PCBU determine if the processing of a CSS is high risk?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. This is definitely a frequently asked question here. So I think we should just review the definition of high risk processing, which is the processing that is likely to result in risk to the health of the person at a workplace. So you can see this little diagram here. Determining if the processing of a CSS that is high risk is undertaken after you have identified the process and determined what controls will be implemented, but before work has commenced. So in determining this, a business must consider the following factors: specific processing undertaken, what forms of crystalline silica are present in this crystalline silica substance, the proportion of crystalline silica present in the CSS, usually this takes the place of a percentage, the likely frequency and duration that a person will be exposed to RCS, whether the airborne concentration is reasonably likely to exceed half of the workplace exposure standard, any previous air monitoring undertaken or health monitoring undertaken at the workplace, and whether there have been any previous incidents, illnesses, or diseases associated with RCS exposure. So one of the things is in assessing if considering all of these things I just talked about, when you're assessing if the processing of a CSS is high risk, you must not rely on the control measures implemented or have regard to the use of PPE or administrative controls. So to sort of try and spell this out, so you may have undertaken some air monitoring with control measures in place, and they may have produced results below half the WES, and you may think that it, means that it shouldn't be deemed as high risk. However, even though the results are below half the WES with controls, the risk needs to be assessed without considering these controls. What would the result look like if these controls weren't in place? You can't assume that your control measures are 100% effective all of the time. They could deteriorate over time, or there could be a fault with the control, which could result in exposure. And this is why air monitoring is really needed to just ensure that your controls are effective. So you must also have, consider if there are multiple tasks being carried out at the workplace at the same time, which could collectively expose workers to levels above the workplace exposure standards. So when you're assessing, just make sure you consider all of those things. Next slide, please, Karen. So I think this is probably one of the most frequently asked questions in my experience. I want to go through a few examples. I should mention that these are only examples to try and help aid your understanding of the regulations, and that if you're experiencing a similar issue, to conduct your own risk assessment, just due to the variable nature of work conditions. All right, so in this scenario, we've got someone cutting concrete with a wet suppression. So here's the table on the left side. We're just addressing all of those things to consider when determining high risk. So the process is cutting concrete with a circular saw. We've got water suppression. There is crystalline silica present in the concrete aggregate. It's industry knowledge. There's about 27% in there, theoretically. And this task is conducted 2 hours a day, 3 days a week, monthly or across the whole working life. It's a pretty significant task for the workplace. And the previous results, or just looking at it, it's likely to exceed half of the WES. There's some previous air monitoring results that showed ranges between 0.02 and 0.04 time weighted average of over 8 hours. There's been one case of adverse health effects. And this would be high risk because the worker is performing this task frequently, and the air monitoring results depict that the levels generally can be reasonably likely exceed half of the WES. And there's also one case of adverse health effects, which may have indicated previous exposure to RCS. So given all those things, it'd be pretty reasonable to call that high risk. Moving on to the next example now. So with this one, same task that's being done, same proportion of crystalline silica for weight average. But the difference is it's up to 2 hours, and this is conducted once a month and infrequently. But this process is likely to exceed half the WES, and then you have previous air monitoring results between 0.02, 0.04, but there have been no adverse health effects documented beforehand. So the main difference is the frequency of the activity has changed to once a month and infrequently. And then given all the other factors taken into consideration, it's likely not to be high risk. Even though it's not high risk, the PCBU still has that duty to control risks of exposure to RCS via the use of controls. But the main one here is the frequency and duration. If it's 2 hours once a month, max 2 hours once a month, theoretically, and even infrequently, they should still manage those controls, but the likelihood of this being high risk is pretty low. So we're going on to the next example. Yep, so we've got another example here, same task, a bit of a decreased percentage of crystalline silica in concrete, but this is conducted up to 2 hours a day, 4 times a week every week, it's unlikely to exceed half of the WES with controls in place. And the previous air monitoring ranges between 0.018 and 0.02. So it's technically below half the WES. And there's been one case of adverse health effects. So for this one, we would say that this would be high risk because mainly looking, it's the so just looking, it's done pretty regularly. So 4 times a week, every day, 2 hours every day. That's quite a substantial task that's being conducted here, and quite frequent exposure as well. The previous air monitoring, even though it shows monitoring below half the WES, this is only monitoring done with controls in place. I think the main thing to consider here is that in the absence of these controls, it would be reasonably likely to exceed half the WES. And in this certain scenario, it seems like it would be reasonably likely for that task to exceed half the WES without those controls in place. And there has been one case of adverse health effects, which may have indicated previous exposure. So because we're considering the frequency and duration of the exposure, previous air monitoring results, not considering controls, and not considering engineering or administrative controls, and there's been an adverse health effect, it would be very likely that this would be a high risk. So yeah, I hope that spells it out for a lot of people. Yeah, so these are only examples to aid your understanding of the regulations. And if you're experiencing similar issues, conduct a risk assessment, just because work can be very variable out there. So yeah, that's on the next slide, next question.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan, for that and for those really good examples. Our next question we've got is it sensible to assume, in the absence of air monitoring data for a task, that it is high risk if that CSS is above 1%?
No.
More than 1% of silica content?
Yep. I guess the short answer is no. Yeah. So mainly, pretty much for the reasons I explained above. If the CSS is only above 1%, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an inherent risk. You need to consider those other factors like the type of processing, the frequency and duration, the likelihood to exceed half the WES, previous air monitoring results or incidents and things like that. So yeah, that was a nice easy one. So yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. Another one for you. If businesses are assuming that work is high risk, can they just use the required engineering control measures and document a silica risk control plan to negate the need to conduct air monitoring?
No. No. Yeah. So if it's high risk, you still need to validate those controls. And so, yeah, air monitoring is required just to ensure that your engineering or isolation control measures are effective in reducing the airborne concentration of RCS to below the WES. Reasons such as inadequate maintenance or faults in filtration systems, or there is a risk that workers may be exposed. One of the best ways to monitor the effectiveness of controls is pretty much to air monitor. Air monitoring also helps to identify what level of RPE is required when engineering controls are not effective in reducing exposure below the WES. And this is mainly to determine whether the protective factor of that supplied RPE is actually protective enough for the identified airborne RCS concentrations. So, let's say you've got, you do some air monitoring and you figure out that, oh, wow, we've got all these controls in place, but we've got an exceedance of the WES by 20 times, but all of our workers are wearing 10 times protection factor, RPE. And that's something you need to consider, because that wouldn't necessarily be effective. So short answer is no. Air monitoring is good to validate the effectiveness of controls.
Thank you for that, Ryan. We'll just go to our next FAQ. So for you again, Ryan, when we're talking about air monitoring, is there a minimum frequency for personal air monitoring? And when are previous monitoring results relevant?
Yeah, so I'll tackle the first question. No, there's no written minimum frequency of air monitoring, but it's usually required when there's a change in controls or conditions at the workplace. So consider if the day that air monitoring was previously conducted was on a windy day, and the results may have been below the WES, but on a calm day, the particles may hang in the air more and increase the airborne concentration. Humidity may also have an effect on airborne concentrations. And then undertaking, air monitoring on a rainy day versus a really sunny and dry day, the results probably likely to be different. The implementation of a new control measure, such as a new dust extraction system or water suppression or enclosed cabin, could all require air monitoring just to validate their effectiveness. It's also worth considering the physical demands of the work being performed. So when workers are having to breathe heavily and they are more likely to get inhaled with dust than breathing normally, this is more so if the worker is wearing, some sort of tight-fitting, unpowered RPE, as it may become uncomfortable and a bit warm, especially in the heat, and could result in the person removing the respirator, or silica-contaminated area. So, in short, it's always good to account for these conditions, just to try and build a robust data set around, varying conditions. Do you have anything to add, Michael, on that one?
Yeah, I'd just like to draw attention there that while there isn't a prescribed frequency for air monitoring, the schedule for air monitoring does go to the maintenance of your control measures. And you need to account for unknown changes over time, but as well, certainly if there are known changes, that's a good impetus to let you know that it's time to do some more air monitoring. In the case of mining the chlorine, for example, if you were to move cells and change the product that you are running through your circuit, that would definitely be a time to reevaluate and do some more air monitoring to understand what the nature of the risks are.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Michael. I think there was also a question on how to determine when previous air monitoring results were relevant. In undertaking the assessment to determine whether the processing is high risk, you must have regard to the results of any relevant air monitoring previously undertaken at the workplace. That is, you should ensure that the data is relevant to the task, controls, and conditions in your workplace. If it's not, the data may not give an accurate indication of your worker's likely exposure to RCS. So previous air monitoring should take into consideration, like some of what we talked about, the frequency and duration of the task performed, materials and the processes used, work procedures, sources of exposure, and the work environment in general, just for those sort of potential environmental factors that I just talked about. There's a few examples of when previous air monitoring results may not be relevant, and this is, when the CSS has changed to a new substance or formulation, the processing of the CSS has changed, the workplace has changed, i.e. a new location that is enclosed or has different dimensions. Additional processing of one or more CSS is now undertaken in close proximity, or additional controls have been implemented. So, yeah, those are things to consider with previous air monitoring. Next slide, please.
Thank you for that, Ryan. I'm now going to ask this question to Stuart. So based on the definition of high-risk construction work, can a business processing CSS use a SWIMS as their risk control plan rather than having, an additional set of risk control plan? Oh, you're muted, Stuart. You're muted.
Yeah, thanks for getting that. So the answer to that is basically yes. So under the regulations, 529 CB, sub-regulation 3, a SWIMS document can replace a silica control plan. But before I proceed with detailing that, I'd like to make it quite clear to industry out there that the SafeWork method statement satisfies the requirements in the sub-regulation 2. So that SWIMS document must be more or less equal to or better to than the silica control plan. Next slide, please. So to detail what you're up against, Sub-Regulation 2 states you must identify all the processing of a CSS carried out in the workplace that is high risk, and include the risk assessment undertaken under Regulation 529 CA for all processing of that CSS that is high risk, and document what control measures will be used to control the risks associated with the processing that is high risk, and how those measures will be implemented, monitored and reviewed. And it must be set out and expressed in a way that is readily accessible and understandable to persons who use it. So yes, the regulations do allow you to use a SWMS document, but just be mindful of what you need to include in that SWMS document. So from a regulator's perspective, everything in Sub-Regulation 2 that I've just described needs to be in that document, and I would regulate against that. On a personal opinion, and I'll quite confidently state this to industry out there, my personal recommendations to assist this process and make it simple is possibly to stay with the intent of the Silica control plan and that risk assessment package, create a package, and in your SWMS document, you can link it back to that package and simply state refer to Silica control plan. I personally believe trying to incorporate that level of information into a SWMS document will make it very convoluted and potentially confusing to workers, and just a tick and flick sign, and without actually understanding and implementing what your workers have been asked to do. That's my personal opinion. Hopefully that answers the question for everyone. Next question.
No worries. Thanks, Stuart, for that. The next question, and so this one for Stuart and also for Michael as well. Michael might want to jump in here a bit. When working with a principal contractor or a PCBU with subcontractors, who has the duty to conduct air and health monitoring?
I'll go first if you're happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll talk from a construction perspective. PCBU conducting the activity, or the individual contractor, subcontractor that conducts that activity, holds all duties to comply with the Silica regulation, and that includes air monitoring and health monitoring for their workers. So as you bounce around from one job to another with various principal contractors, the regulatory requirements for Silica are your duties in full. Under Reg 314, the principal contractor holds an additional duty as a principal contractor, and they must ensure arrangements for ensuring compliance with the regulations. So the duty for the principal contractors to ensure that the PCBU or the subbies that they engage are compliant with the Silica regulations, and they need to set up arrangements at their work site or their building site to confirm that their contractors are compliant with what they state they'll implement and do in their control plans. Hopefully that answers it from a construction perspective. I'll hand over to you, Michael, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so from a mining perspective, rather than a principal contractor, what you would have in that scenario is a mine operator. They hold a very similar commercial arrangement between them and their contractors. And I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that, as we all know, WHS duties are non-transferable. So if you're in that circumstance of being a principal contractor or a mine operator, you have a duty to ensure that any contractors on your site are obeying your policies and procedures as well as the law. Now, when it comes to who's undertaking the dust monitoring, that is essentially a commercial arrangement, and you can decide amongst yourselves who's doing, as long as it's getting done. Usually you would find that whoever's kicking up the dust is responsible under their contract to handle those risks. But ultimately, we're going to look at both parties if there's a problem.
No worries. Thank you both for those answers to that question. I'm going to go back to Ryan now for this one. So what are the requirements for fit testing of RPE, and what should be the frequency of fit testing as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, all fit testing must be carried out by a competent person, such as an occupational hygienist, the manufacturer, supplier, or consultant, or a trained in-house person. So there's two main methods of fit testing, and they meet the Australian Standard 1715 selection, use of maintenance of RPE. So the first one is qualitative fit testing. You can see in the bottom left corner. This is suitable for disposable filter face pieces and can be undertaken by a competent person at a workplace. Qualitative methods are based on the worker detecting leakage through the face seal region using a bitter or a sweet tasting aerosol or odor compound, such as saccharin. And this is a pass or fail test only. So qualitative fit testing results are more subjective than quantitative because some workers may have difficulty with their ability to taste or smell. And this could result in a potential for a false pass, resulting in a worker not being adequately protected. The next one is quantitative fit testing, and this is suitable for half-face respirators, full-face respirators, and tight-fitting PAPR, and gives a numerical measure of the fit. So specialised equipment is required to conduct the measurement, which typically involves a laboratory test chamber or a portable fit testing device. This is a more stringent pass-fail test that demonstrates the level of performance of the respirator with a measurable result for a particular mask on a particular individual. So full face respirators and tight-fitting PAPRs must be fit tested through the quantitative method. I think there was also a question on how often fit testing should be conducted. So workers must pass a respiratory fit test before they first start wearing a tight-fitting respirator. And this could include a half-face disposable, a half-face reusable, a full-face reusable, and a tight-fitting powered air purifying respirator, which is PAPR, which I forgot to mention before. The fit test should be performed at least annually, as described in the standard I referenced. Or each time a new make or model of respirator is provided to a worker, and whenever there is a change in the wearer's facial characteristics or features that may affect the seal. So some examples of this is, some large weight gain or large weight loss, or, loss of teeth. It's good to note that it's unnecessary to undertake a fit test when you are just simply replacing a respirator with the exact same make and the exact same model that you have already been using and have been successfully fit tested for. So that's that question answered, I believe. Hopefully.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. Our next one. So this is for Michael. So why do I have to have a respiratory protection program administrator?
Okay, so this goes to regulation 529B. In that regulation, you'll find that it describes the control of silica process. So it goes through the hierarchy of controls. It says, if there is residual risk and that you need to use RPE to control that residual risk, it calls up the Australian standards 1715 and 1716. Now that makes the content of those standards enforceable. In 1715, there's a requirement to establish a respiratory protection program to ensure that suitable controls are implemented and reported. To administer that program, there's a requirement that you appoint a competent person to head that program. Now, the standards state, and I'll be clear in terms of legal technology, that they say that that person should be a work health and safety professionals such as an engineer, occupational hygienist, or an occupational physician. Now, it also allows, because let's face it, not every enterprise is large enough for it to be reasonable for them to put this person on to administer this program. So there are allowances in the standard to say that you can use a suitable person in your supervision range to administer the program. But the key point there is to ensure that whoever is administering the program has the knowledge and understanding to be able to identify PPE that is of a sufficient standard to mitigate the risk that you're aware of, and to understand how to identify what controls are required, what type of equipment should be used, how to maintain that equipment, so on and so forth. I hope that answers that. Oh yes, just to draw attention, copies of the Australian standards are available for loan from the SafeWork SA library service, or maybe purchased from an authorised supplier. And I have a note that it is apparently also world standard. So
Yes.
get on board.
Yep. Yeah, and definitely, yeah, if you do want to grab those standards, our library service is 100% free, and the standards will be posted out to you. So if you are purchasing, they can cost sometimes $150 to $200. So if you want access to them for free, check out the library service. I've put the link in the chat as well if you want to check that out. Thank you for that, Michael. Okay, back to Ryan for this one. So when notifying exceedances of the WES, does this come from the atmospheric concentration or the breathing zone of the worker wearing RPE?
Yeah, so this WES exceedance must come from personal sampling results conducted in the person's breathing zone. You can just sort of see the right-hand side there. The breathing zone is just defined as, 30 centimetres from our nose or mouth. So the worker will need to wear a personal sampler within their breathing zone during their usual work activities, including routine breaks, just across the whole day or most of the day. And this is just to gather an 8-hour time-weighted average result that can be assessed in line with compliance, because that exposure standard of 0.05 is based on that 8-hour time-weighted average. So results must be reported even if workers are wearing appropriate and correctly fitted RPE. So if someone's got an exposure result of, or an airborne result of 0.05, but they were wearing, a P2, 10 times protection factor, and they're technically controlled, that's still an exceedance, and that still needs to be notified to SafeWork SA. Static monitoring results are not used to measure compliance with the WES. So this is not to say that static or real-time monitoring is not important or useful, as it can be used to sort of identify hotspots, high silica concentration. However, compliance with the WES only takes into account personal exposure in the breathing zone. That's that question, I believe.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. Another one for you, and this is the last one sort of with monitoring, but now looking at health monitoring, is there a minimum frequency for health monitoring, or can businesses determine that, the frequency?
Yeah, so in short, no, there's no written minimum frequency of air monitoring. Rather, the frequency should be determined by a registered medical practitioner with experience in health monitoring. There's nothing against businesses determining their own baseline frequency, however, it should be done with the aid of a practitioner. This is more so because the practitioner would have a better idea of, some of the work processes that go on, and they'll sort of, due to the content of the health monitoring, they'll answer have a better idea of the work and the task and controls and how that affects their health. And health monitoring, the silica includes the collection of demographic, medical and occupational history of the worker, records of any sort of personal exposure, a standardized respiratory questionnaire, a bit of an interview between the doctor and the worker, a respiratory function test, so something like spirometry to measure the volume of air that they can actually exhale and vice versa, a full chest x-ray or a CT scan, and that was the next point. Yeah, a chest x-ray or a CT scan. Yeah, so there is a health monitoring guide out there for crystalline silica available, which offers some suggestions, but I believe we'd recommend going in line, with the physician's recommendations, as they'd have a better idea of, any sort of follow-up, in terms of any ill health identified. So it's nothing stopping businesses from doing that, but it's highly recommended to do it in line with a registered medical practitioner with experience.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So now I'm going to move just to a couple of questions about training. So that is one of the requirements in the regulations for high-risk silica work. So, Ryan, for you, what's the process for a business to apply for regulator-approved silica training? So to have their training basically approved by the regulator.
Yeah, so first of all, they're on our webpage, the Crystalline Silica Content webpage. There's a link to submit training content via an online form. So that content then gets sent to us for us to review the content. Depending on what there is, how accurate it is, we provide a bit of feedback here and there, and we either recommend it for approval by the regulator or not. If it's recommended for approval, there's an approval granted and there's a letter sent to that PCBU. The business name is then put on the SafeWork SA website, and there's a few criteria for this training that must be met, and it's available on our webpage as well. You can see that document down there. And yeah, some of the requirements is, it must be delivered by a competent person, must be at least 3 hours in duration. It's provide a copy of your course content. If you can include speaker notes, that'd be fantastic. Training plan with times for the training, and we've seen some good stuff with competency assessments for questions and answers as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So you mentioned there that one of the criteria is that the training has to be delivered by a competent person. So that's sort of our next question. So what's the definition of a competent person? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's the definition on the next slide. So essentially, it's the responsibility of the PCBU to take reasonable practical steps to determine whether the person engaged to deliver this training has acquired through training, qualifications or experience, the knowledge and skills necessary to competently deliver the training. In making this determination, PCBU should consider that the person's training, qualifications and experience in areas such as work health and safety, hazardous chemical exposure and the health effects of crystalline silica on workers is relevant, essentially. So just ensuring that they are competent enough to deliver the training in a way that is understandable to people, and they have that relevant experience and that relevant industry knowledge of how exposure can occur and how to control against it. So yes, that definition is on our website if anyone would like to refer back to it. So yeah, that's that one for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. And so our last FAQ for today, before we move to our Q&A section, this one's for Stuart. So what are the requirements for removing, repairing or making minor modifications to a silica containing product? So if we're removing and reinstalling a silica benchtop without disturbing the material, what are the requirements there for that? Oh, you're muted again.
I'll get the swing of this. So yes, I've responded to the question, and I interpreted it with a double-edged sword in the question, so to speak. So I'll try and respond to this in the context of dealing with material that has silica content, and I'll also provide a response where the material is engineered stone. So in the context of replacing, repairing or working with a floor tile, this floor tile contains 1% silica content in a workplace or residential home. And when I talk about a workplace or a residential home, I'm talking about a business being engaged by a homeowner or by another business to come in and fix some tiles, floor tiles. So basically regs 529A to reg 529CE apply to this. So you've got to identify the process, risk assess it, if need be, put in a control plan, etc., and do basically what the majority of our conversations at this webinar has been today. In the context of
Oh, you just went mute again, Stuart. I'm sure you accidentally clicked it.
can we go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
So in the context of replacing, repairing, or working with an engineered stone benchtop in a workplace or residential home. So same again, someone engages you to come and do a scope of works on a workplace or residential home with their kitchen benchtop. So basically, in a nutshell, regulations 529D to regulation 529J apply. In essence, you cannot process engineered stone. Full stop. That applies to everything and everyone. However, next slide, please. There is a clause that allows you to do some degree of work with it. So 529, as I said, you can't process it or do anything with it. 529F gives you some degree flexibility to do works with it. So if that particular processing is carried out for genuine research and analysis, unlikely a standard company is going to do that, to sample and identify engineered stones. So if you wanted to go and sample and identify the material to confirm that it is engineered stone, there is a clause in the regulation that allows you to do that. If you wish to remove, repair, or make minor modifications to the installed engineered stone, you can do that. You can dispose of the engineered stone, whether it's installed or not. And if you do any of those, you need to make sure everything is controlled. To give you an understanding of the process, what you've got to do, next slide, please. In a nutshell, you need to notify the regulator of the processing of engineered stone. And if any changes occur to your previous notification, you need to re-notify the regulator. And if you do scopes of works and it goes over 12 months, you need to notify on a 12-monthly basis. And these notifications are completed via the SafeWork SA website. So to put this in context, if I was a cabinet maker and I might have to do minor works on a regular basis in customers or clients' homes to do bits and pieces, this might be where you're using this activity and notifying the regulator of any of these works you're doing. If you're a demolition contractor, you should probably take this all into consideration. If I engage you to demolish my home, it's not unforeseeable that I may have renovated my home prior to my decision to demolish it and replace it. In the process of refurbishment, I've installed engineered stone. So if you come in as a contractor to demolish that home, you need to identify that engineered benchtop and you need to remove it prior to your demolition activity. If you don't, and you start destroying it and crushing it up with an excavator in that traditional demolition process, you are effectively breaching the regulations in the context of processing an engineered stone. As I say, the regulations allow you to do activities to remove it and process it in that context. You've just got to keep the regulator notified of what you're doing and keep your notifications up to date. Hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, Perfect. Thank you for that, Stuart, and Ryan and Michael as well for preparing those answers to those FAQs. We're now going to move to our live Q&A. So if you haven't already, if you can put your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll answer those to the best of your ability. So just make sure that you're putting them in the Q&A tab, not the chat tab. We do already have a few in here. This one is, I guess, more for Stuart, but Ryan and Michael, if you guys want to chime in, feel free. So I've got a question here, and we did sort of talk about this, but given that the definition of high-risk construction work is already high risk, why does a PCBU need to do the risk assessment? As per the regulations, can't they identify the hazard and implement a combination of controls in the SWIMs, i.e. wet cut and RPE?
Bear with me, I'm just getting to the question so I can determine and give you an interpretation and a response. I will provide the response in this context. I see where Chris is coming from. However, not every activity you do with silica containing material may be high risk. Hence, the regulations are set up to provide PCBUs the ability to risk assess it through that processing and determine whether it's high risk or not, and manage it accordingly. The regulations in the context of the silica regulations are a generic set of regulations provided to all of industries out there, and those regulations apply to everyone in a generic context. Some anomalies in construction domain, I acknowledge that. Those regulations still need to be complied with. You have the ability to work around it with SWIMS options instead of silica control plans. I doubt those regulations will be re-edited to make it a bit simpler for construction. Hopefully that answers the question for Chris. If not, happy to go online and chat about it right now if Chris was online.
No worries. Thanks, Stuart. Thank you for, I can see more people are putting their questions in. Thanks for that. This one is for Michael, so it's a bit of a mining and quarrying question. What's the regulator's benchmark for reasonably practicable dust control in quarry settings? So it says remote quarries face water limits, high winds and cost constraints. How does SafeWork SA weigh these realities when judging if our controls are adequate? Are there examples of best practice sites that inspectors consider compliant?
Okay, so obviously this is a complicated area, and a quarrying situation, unlike a lot of construction situations, you're outdoors and subject to variations in weather. One of the things that I would strongly recommend is the SafeWork Australia website has interpretive guidelines on there regarding what is reasonably practical. That is a legal term, which is perceived as being an objective term. So it's important to have a look at what is available in the industry, what those costs are, how that applies to your business. But the long and short of it is that you are mandated to manage these risks. Typically, I would say that, obviously wet dust suppression is preferred control, though I do understand that a lot of sites have a difficulty with enough water. It can be difficult, but there are also alternatives. One of the things that I've seen in industry that is coming up more and more is that some PCBUs are enclosing their circuits and using dry methods, including venturis and local exhausts. It's up to you to undertake these assessments and to be able to say, look, we have determined that these are the reasonably practical controls. At the end of the day, what you need to do is ensure that you are not exposing your workers to exceedances of the WES. I hope that's clear.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. Just I'm just scrolling down here. Questions. So have got a few questions here about air monitoring and the WES. So for you, Ryan. So I'll give them to you sort of not together, but one after the other. So in terms of air monitoring, are we requiring that all workers involved in individual tasks are monitored at their breathing zone? So is it all workers involved in individual tasks monitored at their breathing zone?
Sorry, just trying to find the question. Oh, here we go. We're requiring that all workers involved in the yeah, so this is sort of in reference to previously what we talked about. If you're sort of looking at the tasks that workers are undertaking, and you're sort of not sure, or you sort of suspect that they may be high risk, then yeah, it would be required to air monitor for those tasks that are potentially high risk. In terms of that, if you talk about monitoring absolutely everyone in the workplace, let's say there's 50 workers, 25 of them, and all of them do grinding activities, whether you're required to monitor all of them. If it's exactly the same activity with the controls and similar environmental conditions, you can do a portion of them. It's not required to do absolutely every single one, because that's could be that representative data set can be used and applied to those other workers that are doing the exact same tasks. So yeah, it depends on the tasks. If they're different tasks, then yes, it would be prudent to do some air monitoring to validate the controls for those. But if they're all doing the same task with the same conditions, depending on the size of the workplace, yeah, it may or may not be required to do all of them. So yeah, just focusing on getting a representative data set for workers doing a specific task. Yeah, that's pretty good way to go.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ryan. There's another one here just above that one from Lucy. Is there any guidance on obtaining WES data for tasks that may only take 5 to 10 minutes at a time and or are performed infrequently? If we look at a full day's data, it's impossible to pinpoint the WES for just one task if different things were done across the day.
Okay. So I'm just rereading the questions together.
That's okay.
I guess at the end of the day, if you're looking at the 8-hour time-weighted average, that will give you a good indication of whether or not that was exceeded, whether it's comprised of those smaller tasks or not. At the moment, there's no real-time silica monitoring that I'm aware of on the market, so it is a bit tricky. I think on their website, yeah, if there's no previous air monitoring for specific tasks, you could refer to the whether the manufacturer of the control or the tool has any sort of data about what sort of concentration that task might produce. Could look at any sort of industry associations that do similar sort of work. Or at the end of the day, you could always get an hygienist out, occupational hygienists. They would be very well versed at sort of doing this. But at the moment, we only look at that 8-hour time-weighted average as well. But if there is certain tasks that are quite dusty, it is still up to the PTV to manage the risks to exposure to that dust. I hope that answers your question, Lucy.
Thanks, Ryan. Got a question here and guess kind of met all of you, Ryan, Michael and Stuart can chime in on this one. But basically, this person's asking about looking at labour hire arrangements with regards to obligations to the worker when there's a shared duty and it's the host employer activities which generate silica. So I guess wondering, where those labour hire arrangements or labour hire companies fit in terms of having the duty for air monitoring and things like that. And that's from Christian.
You want to kick off on that one, Stuart?
Yeah, bear with me. I'm just trying to get to the question, find it in the thread. I can't find it. There's a lot of questions in there, but in the context of labour hire, and I won't say this is black and white, but in the general consensus, I would deem the PCBU or the host employer is responsible for the management at site in the context of any risks and processes for silica, whereas a labour hire company was probably responsible for the likes of health monitoring and fit testing of that labourer that they allocate out to various host employers across hypothetically a 12-month period. Does that hopefully answer the question? If not, happy to come online and provide a bit more detail, and I can try and give a bit more response.
And I suppose I would add to that in that I'm just trying to remember the specific details, which is off the top of my head, but there had been a circumstance where maintenance activities were being undertaken by a bulldozer, employing the use of labour hire staff. And one of those workers, I believe, suffered serious injury in the course of those events. And it was definitely the host employer was prosecuted. And I can't recall whether the labour hire organisation was as well. But what it came down to is that the host employer has that duty of care to ensure that workers on the site are using the policies, procedures, and work methods that are approved by that employer.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. So I've got a question here about basically what to do if the exposure standard is exceeded. So if monitoring exceeds the exposure standard, what are our immediate legal obligations? So who must we notify, how fast, and what corrective actions are expected before these operations can resume?
Yeah, I can take that question on. I'll have to double check. Notification regulation. I believe there is a time limit. I cannot remember off the top of my head exactly what that is. I can follow up that for you, Emily. So the obligation is to submit a notification to SafeWork SA. So if you go onto our website, to our webpage, I think it's the Silicosis webpage. There's a link somewhere, and it says to fill out some questionnaires and whatnot. There we go. 14 days. It's within 14 days of receiving that. Cheers, Heidi. Of the exceeded exposure limit. So within 14 days, you go on that website, click on that link, and fill out the form. And so part of that form, you need to provide the air monitoring report and any sort of data that you've gathered that warranted the exceedance as well as fill out some sort of extra questions, whether you have some engineering controls in place, whether you have RPE and, the protection factor of that RPE, and all of that really just sort of helps us out, just sort of figure out the next steps from there, figure out what extent that you guys are adequately controlling it as well. So that's probably the best way to go about that, for sure.
No worries. Thanks, Ryan. And yeah, there is I know there is an online form on our website where you put in the notification for the where's exceedances. So I think if you go to our silica, crystalline silica webpage, the link is on there. Got another question here. So for how many years are PCBUs, contractors and business owners responsible for protecting workers from silicosis after they leave their jobs, and for how long must health monitoring records be maintained?
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm just trying to find this question. Oh, okay, so that was from Edwin. So many species is responsible for protecting workers from silicasis and flavor their jobs. Elements of functional tag and maybe showing less industries. Okay. So I think this is we look at the controls in the workplace, and if they are currently protective of the workers. So once they leave that workplace, it may be a return to work issue that they may have to seek advice from regarding that. But in the example, I did have a case a little while ago, this was from a different hazard, of someone who left a workplace and developed some symptoms. We got a notification from a physician regarding this. And what we did was we went to that workplace just to sort of see if they did have controls in place. And as some time had passed, the disease had progressed, they did have controls in place. So it's probably we like to see that the businesses are doing absolutely everything they can to protect workers from exposure to silica. But in the event that a disease happens after a worker leaves from work, I believe it might be a return to work issue. And how long must health monitoring records be maintained? From memory, I believe there is a certain time period. There's a certain time period. I can double check that. From memory, it may be 30 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought
check
too,
that
Ryan.
as well.
That's the number I've got in my head too.
Yeah. So just checking that workplaces do have the health monitoring reports for those workers over that time, because due to the nature of the disease, silicosis can take some years to develop, and that's a good sort of buffer. I will double check that number for you. It is a year. Sorry, not a year. It is a number of years. Do we have a shading policy in place for industries or jobs with silica exposure to install proper fitting respirators and masks? So the thing is, we as a regulator cannot force people to shave. What we've seen is workplaces will have their own policies around being clean shaven, and we look at that. But as a regulator, we do look at the type of RPE that workers are wearing. So if workers are wearing that tight-fitting P2 mask, then there is a regulation to say that the mask must be an adequate fit for the worker who is to wear and use it, and part of that is being fit tested. So if someone has a big bushy beard and they're wearing a P2 mask, we would look at that and say that worker needs to be fit tested, or we would look whether there is a clean shave policy at the work. There are other alternatives as well for workers who do have beards or facial hair. There are powered air purifying respirators, the loose fitting powered air purifying respirators specifically. They don't require a fit test, and they are effective for people with beards as well. So in short, SafeWork SA does not tell people to be clean shaven, but we do look at whether the RPE supplied is a suitable size and fit for those workers, and that may or may not take the form of a workplace having their own clean shave policy.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. And might just do got sort of two more questions here. One which I think we should be able to answer, and the other one we may have to get back this person, but we'll just finish out with these couple. So should there be a section within a safety management system that discuss CSS and the silica control plan? Stuart, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so not regulated that it's a requirement of the SMP. However, on a personal opinion, I would recommend, yes, that PCBU principals probably go down that path and start documenting where and what and how they're going to manage their duties related to the silica. But yeah, not regulated, doesn't have to be in there. My personal opinion is to engage proactively with it and probably start documenting it to manage it, because the subject overall is worth that level of consideration and documentation.
If I may, just as a point of contrast, Chapter 10 does require mine operators to have a documented safety management system. And I would just like to highlight as well that the risks of exposure of crystalline silica are known, and it is reasonable to say that continuous exposure to respirable crystalline silica could potentially lead to the death of multiple workers over a course of time. Now, that then meets the prescribed definition of a principal mining hazard. And so we do, as the mining team, SafeWork SA, have an expectation that the risks of CSS processing will be represented in the principal mining hazard management plans of the PCBU. That can also be your silica risk management plan, as long as it meets the requirements for both pieces of it.
Well, thank you both. And we'll just end with this one question, and we may be able to answer it here, we may not, but this is a bit more about the health effects of silica. So Ryan may be able to provide some insight here. Can CSS infiltrate the bloodstream/lungs, and at what PM, particulate matter level, would this be?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to break down this question a little bit. So I'm not exactly aware whether it can enter the bloodstream. From the best of my knowledge, it sort of resides and has some sort of immune effect in the alveoli of the lungs. And at what PM? So when we talk about respirable crystalline silica, we usually talk about so the particle size from below 10 micron. And so I believe there's some research data out there that says that the smaller the particle is, going from 10 to 1, the deeper it can penetrate into the lungs. This sort of goes for sub-micron particles as well. They can penetrate quite deeply into the alveoli. But, in terms of at what size fraction does each, respirable crystalline silica particle penetrate, I don't know the exact size of each of that. But yes, so anything under 10 micron has the potential to penetrate infiltrate the lungs. And yeah, so the smaller it goes, the higher the probability that it will penetrate deeper.
Well,
also, if I can just add on to that question from Edwin about the health monitoring records. So Regulation 378 of the WHS regulations says that the health monitoring reports must be kept as a confidential record for at least 30 years after that record is made. So 30 years is the answer there.
Yep.
Edwin, thanks for that.
Thank you, Ryan. Cool. So I think we'll wrap it up here. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. If we did get to most of the questions, but if we didn't, there was a few that I didn't read out just because they were real technical. If you do have any like that, please send us an email. Our email address is there on the screen, help.safework@sa.gov.au. if you have any additional questions, or if you'd like any questions to position to Stuart, Ryan, or Michael, we can pass those on to them and get you those answers to those more technical questions, or more specific, individual questions. Thank you for your participation today. Just to know, this webinar is an initiative as part of National SafeWork Month, which is October every year, and we still have a lot of different events to get involved in. So next week, at the same time, we've got a webinar about lead, which we're doing in conjunction with SA Health. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about lead exposure, you can tune into that one. We've also got a few other different events happening as well, so you can find more info about that on our website. Yeah, a big thank you to Stuart, Ryan and Michael for taking the time today to answer some of these questions. And we will see you next time. Again, if you do have any other questions, our details there are on the screen. You can give us a call or send us an email, and we're more than happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you all.